there, welcome to episode 8 of Pet Squares, the Geek's Guide to the Beach Boys. I'm your host, Adam Marsland, and we are always here to talk about those kooky Beach Boys. What were they doing? Why'd they do it? How'd they do it? Well, today we're going to talk about the Beach Boys' 7th album, Beach Boys Concert, their first live album. And I'm really excited to talk about this album. In fact, I was kind of surprised when I got into the research for it, how many interesting things there were to discuss. Before we get into it, just a little bit of a housekeeping for the show. By the way, yes, I still have that weird little reflection over there. Just deal with it. We'll do little hand puppet things. I want to remind everybody real quickly that there is a Patreon for this channel. We do occasionally do patron-only content, bonus episodes of the show. Admittedly, not that often, but from time to time. And I really do try to put in a lot of work on this channel, doing various things and go the extra mile with editing and always raising the game. So if you want to keep supporting that and help me keep that going, consider pitching in. And if you don't want to, certainly can't blame you. It's not like we all have money growing on trees. I've been sick for the last 2 weeks. So not only am I glad to be talking to you, I'm just glad to be breathing. So anyway, Beach Boys Concert. What a cool record. So many interesting things about this album. Now, it is the Beach Boys, of course, their first live record, but it was also their first #1 album, and it's only one of two that they had in their entire career, the other one being the 1974 compilation, Endless Summer. The Beach Boys never had a #1 studio album. I think the closest they came was Surfing USA. I think that made #2. So let's read a little bit about Beach Boys Concert from Wikipedia. It was released on October 19th, 1964. #1 for 4 weeks. It was on the charts for a total of 62 weeks. It also has a place in rock music history as being the first live album to ever top the charts, which actually kind of amazes me. I'm surprised that Frank Sinatra or somebody didn't do that. There might be some technicality there, but it says in Wikipedia, the first live album to top pop music record, top. I've been sick. Top pop music charts. So I guess that probably disincludes jazz records, but that's still a pretty damn impressive thingy. Now, how this came about is the concert album was recorded in Sacramento, California. This was the first town to really give the Beach Boys rock star treatment. It wasn't their hometown of LA. It never really is. Take it from me. If you want to become a rock star, leave wherever you grew up. But Sacramento loved them. They had one of their first big successful concerts there. It's where they first interacted with a teenager named Fred Vale, who became their concert promoter for many years and I think even managed them at one point. A little vague on that. Fred, by the way, just appeared for a second time on the Beach Boys Talk podcast, which was also kind enough to have me on recently. So if you want a little more inside baseball from him, that would be a great resource for you to check out. At any rate, it was Fred Vale himself who prevailed upon Murray Wilson and Brian Wilson to consider doing a live album. They originally thought, why do people want to pay for a record of a show they just saw? And Fred said correctly, people will want an artifact of that performance, something to relive again and again. So there were 2, possibly 3 attempts to get this album going, all at the Sacramento Memorial Auditorium. The band did 2 shows there in September 1963. Now, interestingly, Brian was not at either of these shows. So I had some indication in my notes that they may have tried to record these. But to be honest with you, I'm not sure if that was based on Fred's recollections. And if so, he may be mixing up his dates here because they did play in September 63, or I may just be mixing up my notes. Unfortunately, I can't easily go check. But what is definitely known is that there was another attempt, or possibly the first attempt, made on December 21st, 1963, Carl Wilson's 17th birthday. Think about that. 17th birthday, which means he was 16 for the earlier shows. And those tapes were deemed for the time being to be unusable, so they made another go at the same venue on August 1st, 1964. And this time they went immediately to work on it, because by the end of August they are in the studio on the 31st doing vocal sweetening. They're in the studio prior to that recording When I Grew Up to Be a Man, a song we have yet to cover, and a Bob and Bobby session. Interesting. We'll be covering that on the next bonus episode of Pet Squares. But at any rate, quick work, because they're done with the record beginning of September. It's out middle of October, and bam, a very happy occasion for all concerned. Now, everybody agrees that this live album, like many albums purportedly recorded in concert, was heavily, heavily sweetened. And in fact, after reviewing what's known about the recording of this album and then doing some of my own research and my own ears, I don't think there are any live vocals on this album except for Johnny Be Good and a couple of other very minor exceptions that I'll get into when we get on them. I believe the whole album was re-sung. Probably the stage patter, at least some of it, possibly all of it, was repattered. And also, two of the songs were simply repurposed remixes of the studio recordings, Fun, 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 and I Get Around. They apparently started to re-record them, or at least re-recorded Fun, 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 and then said, well, we're doing the studio stuff. We're doing studio recordings anyway. Let's just use the studio tapes. So they used the raw tracks without the extra instrumentation, bang new vocals on them, threw the crowd noise on, and Bob's Your Uncle, you got a live album. So the actual live elements of In Concert are basically most of the musical performances and a lot of the crowd noise. But that doesn't make it a less compelling listen, and it also still gives us a sense of what the band was like live, because there was a later release of the raw tapes of some of these concerts, and in order to sort out what was going on, I listened to some of them. I didn't listen to the whole thing because there's like an endless number of tracks, like 72 billion. You know, what actually was performed was not that different from what was released, except the vocals were just not great. That doesn't mean they sucked. I mean, they're about as good as you could expect, given the complexity of the material, how primitive the sound reinforcement were. Carl and Al were sharing a mic, so there were balance issues. The band was, you know, singing off key a decent amount of the time. Particularly Brian on the falsetto stuff was flat a lot. And you can really hear this on the 1990 reissue of this CD, where they included an undoctored version of Don't Worry Baby, which, you know, is a nice artifact to have. But you can hear the more raw sound that they had to work with before they overdubbed all the new stuff. And yeah, it's cool to listen to, but Brian's, you know, it's a tough song. I'm not dissing Brian, but he's not singing it fantastic. He's struggling, as almost any human being would, trying to play bass and sing that song. It's an extremely difficult song to perform, and back in those days, there's no monitors. They're playing every night. It's just what you'd expect, and you can't release that. So they went and redid it. Now, I'm going to tell a real quick story from my own personal experience. Yeah, I did an album with my band, the Adam Marsland's Chaos Band, back in 2006, where we did a live album of Carl and Dennis songs, and Mark Lynette was originally going to produce it, and we had a difference of opinion about how we wanted it to sound, because Mark, you know, comes from the Beach Boys organization, and in his mind, you do it exactly this way. You go perform it live, and then you go back in the studio. You're supposed to recut all the vocals so they sound right, you know. And but we were trying to make our reputation, and to us, you know, it was no big accomplishment to go in the studio and re-sing everything. So we basically bought the rights from Mark, and we were able to, me and Alan and Evie, produce it in such a way that it worked. But we had a lot of, but even then we did redo a few things. We didn't, not a lot, but we had to do a couple things or else you couldn't listen to it. I mean, it's probably 90% live or 95%, but we still did redo that little 5% because otherwise you can't listen to it, unfortunately. We did try to, if someone was out of tune, we just kind of duck them or put a little reverb in or whatever. We tried not to use sort of ways that we're not cheating, things that you could have done live to make it better rather than now we'll just redo it. So, but that's a lot of effort and not a lot, and that's just not the way things are generally done. They certainly couldn't have done that with the technology available at the time. Fred Vale spoke in a Facebook post some time ago about the recording of this album, and he claims that the Beach Boys' popularity were basically what turned Sacramento into a live music destination for touring acts. They basically made the town as a live destination, and as someone who's played Sacramento successfully many times in his own career, I thank the Beach Boys and Fred Vale for that. Now, in terms of which tracks were done when, Craig Slowinski, the world's foremost authority on who played what on Beach Boys records, referred me to an old post on the Pet Sounds forum, an ancient Beach Boys message board before, they always seem to morph into something else. But at any rate, the username was The Real Barnyard. I've been unable to fully ascertain who this was. But thank you, Mr. Barnyard, for your contribution to this show. He has a breakdown of what songs were done at which show according to his ken. He only has some of the vocals being re-recorded, but I think that's just a function of the material that he had for review, not wanting to extrapolate based on stuff he didn't have, e.g. the raw tapes from 1963. As I said, I believe that except for Johnny Be Good, every single vocal on this album has been recut. So I'm just going to run down, before we get into the track by track, as to which songs were done when. The intro by the aforementioned Fred Vale is the December 21st, 63 show. The Fun, yeah, that was never done. We'll get into that in a minute. Little Old Lady from Pasadena, that's from, I guess there were two shows on August 1st from which this album was called. It was from the second show of the August 1st, 1964 show. Little Deuce, Coupe, Long Tall Texan, In My Room, Monster Mash, all apparently from 1963. Let's Go Trippin' is the second show for August 1st. Papa Oomau Mau apparently is the December 21st, 63 show. The Wanderer is the second show, August 1st, 64. Hawaii, first show, August 1st, 1964. Graduation Day, second show, August 1st, 1964. I Get Around, it's according to Mr. Barnyard, the intro is live and it was done at the first show, August 1st, 1964. The rest of it is basically the studio version. And Johnny Be Good apparently is December 21st, 1963. Also says the intro to Papa Oomau Mau was recorded at August 1st, 1964. So make of that. So I guess they took the 1964 intro with the 1963 performance. So for those of you keeping score, you have two songs that were basically studio, which is Fun, and I Get Around. Then from 63, Deuce, Coupe, Long Tall Texan, Monster Mash, and Papa Oomau Mau, and Johnny Be Good, and everything else is from 64. Got it? Good. So the album kicks off with Fun, their recent number 5 studio track, their first post-Beatlemania hit and one of their most recent songs at the time. This was originally conceived as a blues number, and apparently at some point in the sweetening sessions, they tried to go back to the original blues arrangement. They quickly tossed that. Then they tried to redo it live, and there's a little bit of an artifact of that remaining in that the last chord, which sounds live, is actually from this live in the studio redo attempt. But the rest of it is simply the studio version of Fun, 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 stripped of a few overdubs. And it sounds to me also like they sped it up a little bit. Not much more to talk about with that one, so let's move right on to Little Old Lady from Pasadena. Now, one of the things that makes Beach Boys concert so interesting is how many non-Beach Boys tracks that they decided to do. And this is a little strange in the modern day, where bands basically play their own stuff, and if they play covers, they aren't doing it as a cover band. Like, here's some of the stuff that's popular right now. You know, like Bruce Springsteen doesn't go up and play Ed Sheeran's Perfect. You know, oh, let's do this, or you know, Dua Lipa doesn't. I'm not going to go down this road anyway. But this was a little more in keeping with the times, where bands very often would have a hit and they do an album, and half of it would be originals and the other half would be covers of songs that were popular of the day. Now, at least with the Beach Boys, all of these songs had some meaning, some relevance to them. And of course, Little Old Lady from Pasadena is a song by Jan and Dean, a band that the Beach Boys had quite a close relationship with. But what's interesting about this is Brian co-wrote a lot of Jan and Dean's hits, but to the best of my knowledge, did not co-write Little Old Lady from Pasadena. In fact, let me just double check that. Yeah, that's Don Altfeld, Jan Berry, and Roger Christian, their standard songwriting team of the time, but no Brian on that one. So they did a non-Brian co-authored Jan and Dean track when they could have done one where they actually had a band member that wrote the song. So they chose not to do that, which is interesting. It may simply be because it was the most accessible and one of their most recent hits. It is an early acknowledgement of the sort of duality of Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys, how they sort of coexist in the popular mind as being one and the same band to casual fans. And probably a lot of people even then thought Little Old Lady from Pasadena was a Beach Boys song. And in fact, in later days, when Jan and Dean returned to the road in the late 70s and later to the 80s, 90s, and aughts, Dean Torrance often preferred to actually play Beach Boys covers rather than their own material at their own concerts. So there is a little bit of that Jan and Dean Beach Boys crossover situation happening here. They do the full 3-verse version of this with the quad speed stick and the 436. I don't remember that. I'm sure that's a Roger Christian contribution. But Christ, the screams on this. Oh my God. It is said that some of the reason that they had to overdub the vocals is the screams were so god-awful loud that the tracks were unusable. That may have been true of the 1963 sessions, but I don't think it was true of the 64 based on what we have from the bootlegs. But certainly these are just piercing. In fact, it reminds me of the one stadium tour I ever did with John Mayer and Counting Crows. I was on the bottom of that bill as the keyboard player for the opening act, so I wasn't doing anything special, but trying to get through that crowd and Your Body is a Wonderland had just hit. It was back then, and this 25,000 young women going, "Your body is a wonderland." Oh my God, I thought I was going to, sorry, but it makes me drool just to think about it. I thought I was going to puncture an eardrum. And you got to wonder what that was like for Brian with his hearing issues and possibly a little bit of anxiety kicking in there. We're now in the thick of Brian's year plus of being a full-time Beach Boy. And this had to just add to the general intensity of what he was experiencing. So a couple of things besides the screaming about little old lady from Pasadena that I noticed is something very peculiar happens at 32 seconds in, where we get the live return of the drums coming in suddenly very loudly for a few seconds. I don't know why this would have happened. It's actually a little mystifying, but it did. I'm sure there was a technical, either something they had to cover up or a live engineer switched a feed or something, but it comes in on the right channel, so it doesn't appear to be part of the live track that they're working with. So that's interesting. At 2 minutes and 5 seconds, you can hear a tiny bit of the live vocals peeking through. Another thing that's kind of interesting is we get a lot of glimpses of the Beach Boys as a band, what they were like on this recording. And one thing we notice is that Al Jardine, fairly light in the mix as a rhythm guitar player. This is something that never changed. Apparently was from the very beginning to the very end. Al, you don't really hear him in the live mix all that much, except on certain rare occasions. And on Little Old Lady is one of the times where you can hear Al. You can hear his rhythm guitar quite well under the solo when Carl's doing the solo, and he's really wailing. He's really pushing. You know, you think of Al as being kind of laid back, but it's very adrenaline fueled. And we'll hear another example of this later. But it's interesting. I suspect when they made the switch from David, who they always had trouble getting him to tuck in under Carl. I think that probably with Al's position in the band and also him being the de facto bass player in the studio, they just basically established a hierarchy where you're not supposed to be louder than Carl and you're here to sing the high tenor harmonies, and Al probably was totally fine with that. But we do get a little bit of a glimpse of what he's doing as a player, and it's pretty aggro. Okay, so speaking of Al being light in the mix, we get little Deuce Coupe and the now iconic little Mike Love bit about showing how Beach Boys records were made. And I say this because we get, it starts out with Denny on the drums, and then Al comes in with the rhythm guitar, and we barely hear him. What's interesting for this is Mike says, some of you may remember the way Beach Boys records are made, and since nobody in the audience, I suspect, except maybe Fred Vail, has ever been at a Beach Boys session, I'm guessing this means they did this bit of stage patter on a prior occasion. But anyway, they do this whole deal where, Dennis plays the drums, and then Al plays, Blinkin' You Can Miss Some rhythm guitar. And then Carl comes in, and okay, there's the entirety of the guitar sound, and then Brian fills things out instrumentally. I don't know how else he would do it on the bass, and then they all step up to the mic, and it sounds a little bit like this. There's a really good version of this on the Beach Boys Lost Concert on YouTube where Brian does a rim shot, where Dennis does a rim shot. He doesn't even do a rim shot. I can't even get this right. Take 3. Dennis does a funny little clank on the cymbal to mimic the comic effect of a rim shot, and Carl flashes him a little grin, and so that's fun. You can look that on Lost Concert. Pretty nice groove on the song itself between Dennis and Brian. I'm going to be talking about this quite a bit on this recording because this is one of the only times in the history of the band we actually hear Dennis and Brian as a rhythm section, and they're quite a good one. Brian's vocals are really cranking on the bridge. Interestingly, for a second, Carl gets on the wrong fret, and that's not surprising because they can't really look at their hands the way they gotta have their heads out. Carl and Al are on the same mic, so it's a little hard for them if they want to check where they're at to see where they're going. So we do get a few instances of various band members being on the wrong fret. Dennis blows the ending. Oh, and I just lost my lavalier mic. What do you think of that? Hello. Wait, I'm gonna do. Guess what moment in Beach Boys history this is? Right on. Well, is this ABC? Yes, it is. Thank you. The Good Morning America sketch from 1980. Thank you. Now, hey. Next song, Long Tall Texan with a 10-gallon hat. I'm not from Texas. Spent a lot of time in Texas. Like it a lot. If I was Texan, I think I'd shoot Mike. Maybe not. I don't know. This song has a really interesting history. I just threw a little shade at Mike, but you know, you can hear on this album especially well why Mike was such a good frontman, at least in the early days. He really knew how to play to the back seats. He really knew how to, engage on a basic level with people that, they're not necessarily the kind of people that are there to hear "Let's Go Away" for a while, and those are his people, and that's a large part of the band's success. For all of you that don't like that aspect of the band and what Mike brings to it, and I'm one of those people that I'm not crazy about a lot of the way he rolls on stage, but as a performing musician and as someone who's had to learn a lot of these skills, he knows that a large part of the audience that he's playing to is going to relate to a lot of his goofball Dumbo shtick, and he's right. There's so many instances on this record where Mike just knows he's playing for a bunch of teenagers. They're not super sophisticated. They're not super slick. Easy and obvious is gonna sell. Now, the part of the problem is Mike kind of stuck with that approach forever. I mean, he did evolve a bit, but this created some conflict when the band's style grew, and that wasn't as appropriate, and it wasn't as natural for him. But at the same time, then you had other members of the band stepping up a little bit more to take up that kind of slack. You had more of Carl and even Dennis being up front, representing that sort of other side of the band. So on a song like Long Tall Texan, where Mike's just hamming it up, I mean, there's nothing to get, if you follow what I'm saying. I mean, if you're in the audience, you don't have to have any particular level of hipster humor to understand what Mike's putting across to you. And that's the beauty of Mike Love. Love it or hate it. It was a key part of the band's success early on. It was completely appropriate in the early days for where rock music was at and where the band was at. And it has kept the Beach Boys relevant with a certain very, very large pool of concert goers that do not necessarily engage with the Beach Boys music on the level that someone that watches Pet Squares would. But let's face it, this show gets 500 viewers, 1,000 on a good day. That's a niche. Mike's going for the gravy, and that even though the approach that Brian brought to it and the artistry of the other guys, that has broadened and deepened the band's position in the rock world. And it has made them much more greater and more transcendent than Mike's vision of the band. But you can't take Mike out of it and not lose a whole nother segment of their popularity. It is that conflict, if you will, or that uneasy coexistence between art and commerce, which has made the Beach Boys such an enduring and sometimes baffling force over the years. As much as I would have liked to have seen Mike make some different moves from time to time, you could say that about Brian or Dennis and even Carl. They are who they were, and that's the way it is with any band. What the heck what was I talking about? Long Tall Texan. Oh my gosh. So sorry. Tangent. I got a lot more to say about this song. Long Tall Texan has been done by many, many folks. The Beach Boys did it again, regrettably. Speaking of regrettable later Beach Boys moves, with Doug Supernaw in 1996. I guess that's one of the less objectionable tracks on that album, the Stars and Stripes album. I don't know. It's also been done by Ben Folds, Lyle Lovett, the Kingsmen. The first hit version was by Murray Kellum. That was in 1963. But the first version of it is by a band called the Four Flickers. And it came out in 1959. And this is a really interesting recording. I checked it out on YouTube, and I would really recommend it to you guys to listen to it as well. Because the original version of Long Tall Texan is not at all what I expected. The Four Flickers apparently were a band from Memphis that recorded on a small label called Lee, L-E-E. They seem to have been sort of a vocal group a la the Platters, and this was the B-side to what is actually a heavily orchestrated, fairly straight vocal harmony ballad. And in the B-side, you have this song, which couldn't be more different than the A-side. It has rather elaborate horn effects on it, including the horn mimicking a horse. And it seems to have been written by the one of the Four Flickers, Henry Strzelecki, I believe is how you say his name. But it was one of that band, and it seems to have been sort of a novelty B-side to what was intended to be kind of a straight ballad A-side. But apparently it got picked up by this Murray Kellum guy. How it got to the Beach Boys, I don't know. Maybe Murray Wilson he couldn't get him to do his song, so they want him to do another Murray. I don't know. But they wound up doing this song. They really liked this song. I saw them play this in 1981 during that notorious Carless period, and Al Jardine actually played bass on it at that time. Mike claimed at that concert that Brian had suggested they do it, I guess. That's why it was brought back at that time. But the song will never piss off and die, I guess. Incidentally, something I noticed, Mike never seems to finish the hook line. It's like, hoorah, hoorah, squirrel! He never gets to the hat, Is that your squirrel? Listen, I don't think he ever finishes the chorus, ever. There's a fun little bit at the end, one of the last appearances of Mike Love's sax, duetting with Brian in deliberately bad style. I actually ripped off this ending idea, throwing a little Zappa in the mix when my own band did the Standells' Dirty Water, but then I joined the Standells and I couldn't do it anymore. I can't remember if I tried to get them to, but I don't think they would have gone for that. Okay, next we got In My Room. Notably, immaculate studio done vocal performance. Brian's bass is a little all over the place. There's a little bit of a bass fart when he comes in. He makes a mistake for the bridge, and at the end he gets on the wrong fret, so he's playing a half step out of tune. That also happens on the Don't Worry Baby track that I talked about, the one that's on the 1990 reissue. Again, not uncommon, I'm sure, for them to not be looking at their hands and get on the wrong fret. And it took them a while to hear it, probably, because the sound was what it was. I like how the band kind of doesn't end, just trails off. Also gotta say, I'm not 100% sure that it's not Dennis on the bottom reprising his studio part. But I listened not too carefully. I couldn't resolve this question for myself. Dennis, by the way, I think is pretty clearly singing on this record in certain places, and we'll get into that when we get to I Get Around. So it may have been him, because again, they redid these in the studio. So, Monster Mash. Another really interesting track. This was a song originally done by Bobby Boris Pickett. It was a #1 hit in 1962, so a fairly recent deal. It charted again in 1970 and 1973. And the backing vocalists on the track were the Blossoms, one of Phil Spector's finest vocal proteges, which I'm sure made Brian happy. There's a priceless Brian intro, which it's nice to hear early Brian sound so together, although I must note that listening to the raw tracks, this is one of the tracks I listened to, Brian's intro is quite a bit more scattered and sort of what maybe if you think of Brian as being not the most comfortable on stage, what you would expect the intro to be like. So I do find myself wondering if that intro wasn't redone in the studio. Brian makes reference to the green lighting. So what they did is they put a green light on Mike's face, and I think he flashed a flashlight under his chin to get a horror movie effect. I think there's a picture of this on the back of the album. You can definitely hear that this was redone in the studio because you can hear artifacts of Mike's original live vocal in many places on this track. You just get out the headphones, you'll hear this sort of echo in the background, and you'll hear that Mike's original vocal had quite substantially different timing. It makes sense because a lot of this is improvisational. He's gooning it up, he's hamming it up, so it's hard to do the exact same place twice, so you're not going to get a very tight overdub. So you can definitely hear the overdub nature of the lead vocal here. The backup vocal is also being redone, but they're in exactly the same place, so you're not really going to hear so much the original track. In fact, to the extent that you'll hear them, they will just thicken up the overdubs and make them sound more live. In other words, you'll hear a little bit of the artifact of the original live vocals, and that'll just sort of make the new studio vocals blend better. So, what else we got? Mike drops a stick or something at 1:15 seconds. The vocals groove really, really nice. Brian, in particular, pleasure to listen to here. Again, really nice groove between Brian and Dennis. I'm going to do a deep dive into this a little bit later, but one of the most enjoyable things on this record is hearing Dennis and Brian play against each other. They're a fun rhythm section. Crypt Kicker 5 from the original Monster Mash becomes the Beach Boy 5. Ha ha ha. Little in-joke there. And that's really all there is to say about the Monster Mash, except it wasn't Halloween when any of these were done. I guess they just felt like doing it. So Mike could get green light in his face. I think that's pretty much all there is to this song. Hey, I put on my best Bruce Johnston short shorts and barely audible Fender Rhodes patch to let you know that there was so much cool stuff to talk about on the Beach Boys concert that I decided to break it into two parts. So stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to talk about Dennis and Al as punk rockers, a little bit more about Brian as a bass player, and just all kinds of good trivia about the songs and stuff that the Beach Boys did. So anyway, see you there.